The Sovereign Citizen by Judge Dale, retired. Thursday, April 11, 2013. Our federal government has instructed our federal, state, and local police agencies that everyone who purports to be a sovereign should be treated as a terrorist. They've also brainwashed the American public into believing that being a sovereign is anti-American and unpatriotic. Perhaps this is the pot calling the kettle black. What is sovereignty? It is the inherent right and prerogative of a civilized people to rule itself and to dictate all of the forms and conditions of the institutions it sets up to carry out this rule. Ironically, the U.S. Supreme Court agrees with those people who claim to be sovereign citizens of the American Republic. Bond versus United States, Volume 529, U.S. Reporter, page 334, year 2000. The Supreme Court held that the American people are in fact sovereign and not the states or the government. The court went on to define that local, state, and federal law enforcement officers were committing unlawful actions against the sovereign people by the enforcement of the laws and are personally liable for their actions. Bond versus United States, Volume 529, U.S. Reporter, page 334, year 2000. Supreme Court, cited by 761 litigants in other cases. Bond versus United States, Volume 131, Supreme Court Reporter, page 2355, year 2011. Supreme Court, cited by 306. Bond versus United States, Volume 1, Federal Reporter, 3rd Series, page 631, year 1993. Court of Appeals, 7th Circuit, cited by 66. What are the implications of this 2000 U.S. Supreme Court ruling? Number one, the delegates to the First Federal Convention prohibited the use of corporations by all governments representing the American Republic. Therefore, all of these corporate governments and their corporate laws are a usurpation of the organic Constitution of the United States of America. All state governments are now subcorporations of the federal government, making all courts and all law enforcement personnel corporate federal agencies or employees. See James Madison Journal of the Federal Convention, Volume 2, page 722. And pull up your state code on your PC and search the code for the words District of Columbia and federal government. You will receive about 1,000 references linking your state to the federal government. Number two, the state and federal government is a corporation, and therefore the Congress, state legislatures, city councils, municipalities, and all state and federal courts are corporate entities posing as constitutional branches of government.
Okay, Shirley, we're looking at this. It's addressed to John Andes.
I won't do that. Oh.
What's important that we notice here?
Okay, first of all, we're talking about the Courthouse Corporation. And if you notice, Farrell happens to be a judge. Right here, we're talking about the Courthouse Corporation. the same thing you'll see, that it is a private corporation.
The courthouse is a private corporation.
Private corporation.
This is dated 1985.
Right, but it's been going on since 1984. So it is a private corporation, and this is where they float bonds, building courthouses without the approval of the citizens.
These are all the different courthouses and the amount of money. There was no citizen approval for all these.
Right, and it makes it owned by the judges and not the people. I'm going to show you why. As I said before, this is the Courthouse Corporation. And here's the bonds that they've been floating, right here. This is one of the bonds that they floated. But I would
The obligation of the county to pay base rental payments does not constitute.
In other words, what they do, they build these courthouses and then they pay rent on the same courthouse that they just built. And this is showing the payment schedule on this courthouse. And here
Whoa! We're talking millions and millions of dollars a year in rental payments.
And rental payments. Wait a minute. And you see Antonovich here, he is appointing Farrell, which we saw back here earlier.
Wait.
He's a corporation that was created in 1984, and they use this corporation to float bonds without voter approval. Anything that's private, they don't have to notify the public, but when it's public, so this is how they get around. They create these private corporations. To prove that it's private is because we have a letter right here. Before I get to that point, here it is, Antonovich appointing a judge to be on the board. We're talking about Judge Farrell. If you see right here, that's Judge Michael Farrell. Then we go here.
Where's Antanovich's signature there? I don't see a signature. It says Violet Verona Lukens, Executive Officer.
Right, and she works under Antonovich, and I'll find that other letter in a minute. It's a private corporation because when we called about it, if you see right here, the corporation is incorporated as a private, non-profit corporation. So therefore, if it's a private corporation, why are they floating bonds, paying back these debts without voter approval? The reason being is because they created it so that they can make it private. Here it is, the corporation itself, when it first went into this is when they did it in 1988. Here it is, and basically what's so amazing about this is that the county council sits there and advises them how to operate their corporation at taxpayers' expense. So we're paying them to sit there and fight against you when you sue the county, and then they sit here and they advise them as to how to get around voter approval by floating bonds called certificates of participation, which means that they do not have any withholding to the public. So that's one of the things I wanted to share with you. And if you look at this closely and take time, you'll see the county council is in there.
Number 3, corporations are privately owned businesses, meaning that the corporate United States belongs to one or more private individuals, which is always governed by a board of directors. The corporate United States is privately owned by a group of European royal and elite individuals tied to the Federal Reserve System, and the letters of incorporation are recorded in the Vatican. The President of the United States is actually the CEO of the United States, and the Congress and all others are corporate employees. Everything they do is in the interest of the corporate owners. I can't access those documents because of national security. Number 4. In order to promulgate and enforce criminal laws to govern the sovereign public, government must be sovereign too, which is an accepted rule of law derived from the ancient law of kings. Corporations are not and can never be sovereign. They are not real. They are a fiction and only exist on paper. Number 5. Therefore, all laws created by these government corporations are private corporate regulations called public law, statutes, codes, and ordinances to conceal their true nature. Do the judge and your lawyer know about this? You bet they do. Number 6. Since these government bodies are not sovereign, they cannot promulgate or enforce criminal laws. They can only create and enforce civil laws, which are duty-bound to comply with the law of contracts. The law of contracts requires signed written agreements and complete transparency. Did you ever agree to be arrested and tried under any of their corporate statutes? For that matter, did you ever agree to contract with them by agreeing to be sued for violating their corporate regulations? Citations and complaints are contracts, but they lack transparency because you were never told what might happen to you if you agreed to contract, and that you had a right to refuse the accommodation. Number 7. Do any of the American courts have jurisdiction over a sovereign? Yes, but only by your consent to be judged by the court. Can they compel, summon, or subpoena you to appear or participate in their process? No. They can't compel you, and yes, they can ask, but you can reject the accommodation in writing, and nothing can be done about it because you have refused to give the court jurisdiction over you. Number 8. Enforcement of these corporate statutes by local, state, and federal law enforcement officers are unlawful actions being committed against the sovereign public, and these officers can be held personally liable for their actions. See Bank versus United States, Volume 529, U.S. Reporter, page 334, year 2000. Number 9. There being no constitutional criminal laws or transparency in the American justice system, everyone arrested, convicted, and sentenced to prison under these civil laws are imprisoned by consent, and therein all American jails are actually debtors' prisons. Number 10. Most of the county and state prisons and all the federal prisons are privately owned corporate businesses for profit, which kick back to the sentencing judges. The Bureau of Prisons Privatization Management Branch provides general oversight for these institutions. So if you are convicted in these courts, you can expect to serve some jail time. Now you know why America has such high prison populations. Number 11. Can the state government and courts take custody of your children? Only with your consent. Otherwise, their agents and officers can be held personally liable for their actions. Orphans are a different matter and can become wards of the court until emancipated. Corporate governments are a usurpation of the organic American Constitution, and this corporatist onslaught in America has since its creation been an anti-sovereign and terrorist regime, and are in fact the real terrorists and traitors to the American Republic. Blessings, Judge Dale, retired. Hey, thanks for watching the video. If you like more videos like this, make sure you hit the subscribe button and hit the notification bell at the bottom of the screen so you can get more in-depth information only here, right on High Frequency Radio. Peace to the gods.